The cold wind cuts through your clothes as you stand on the shore, watching the ship pull away, knowing you've been abandoned by your shipmates. You turn and you struggle into the tree line. For a moment, you're thankful that they abandoned you on a real island instead of just an empty sandbar. But as the sun begins to set and you hear screaming voices all around you in the dark, that feeling disappears as your heart drops into your guts because you realize you've been marooned on the Isle of Demons. Today we're looking at Canada's own phantom island, the Isle of Demons. But first, hello! My name is Garvin and I read things and rattle on about them on the internet for your entertainment. With the introductions done, let's turn to. The Isle of Demons is a type of lost land called a phantom island. These are islands that appeared on maps, but upon further investigation have been proved to, well, not exist. Although the Isle of Demons is an interesting case because we're sure there was an actual island at the bottom of this story, just not where it was. I'll explain, just stay with me. The Isle of Demons first appeared on maps in 1508 on a map by Johannes Ruysch, a Dutch explorer and map maker, and I want to apologize to the Dutch for my pronunciation. That's the best I could do. He put the island named Insule Demonium right smack in the middle of the passage between Greenland and Labrador, a passage that the Norse, the first European sailors in the area, deeply feared, probably because of the sudden storms that kept wrecking their boats. Now, originally, the Isle of Demons may have actually been the relocation of another phantom island, this one a Portuguese island called Santanantes, aka the Island of Devils or the Hand of Satan, which is certainly a name that easily sticks in your memory. Now, that island was supposed to be located just north of another lost island named Antilla, and I'm not going to dive too deep into these two islands because they're going to be the subjects of their own videos in the future. When depends on how the patrons vote, of course. So if that's something you're interested in and you want to hurry that along, just remember, you get a vote on upcoming videos for just $1 a month. Just throwing that out there. Getting back to the Isle of Demons, though, sailors would claim that this island was somewhere off the coast of eastern Canada, and you would know when you got close to it because you would be able to hear the screaming of demons and imps that dwelled on the island. And it probably didn't help that throughout the 1500s, shipwrecks were fairly common, usually due to storms and other hazards, and some of those ships' disappearances were blamed on the demons. A French explorer priest named André Thivet claimed that he survived a night on the island only by constantly repeating the Gospel of John to fend off those demons. Now, I prefer the Gospel of Luke myself, but to each his own. That said, I want you to remember his name. He's going to come up again. So, why are we so sure that there's a real island at the bottom of these stories somewhere? Well, at least 3 people were marooned there, at least 1 person was born there, and out of that group of 4, everyone but 1 died there. So, let me briefly introduce you to a French noblewoman, Marguerite de la Rocque. We don't know when or even where she was born. I assume the smart money is in modern France, but we have no record of that. We do have records of her giving fealty and homage to the King of France in return for lands in modern-day Périgord and Languedoc. She also shared authority over a fief in Pontpoint, and I'm just going to note for the record, this is the best I can do, even with the pronunciation guides I could find, so any French people reading this, I'm sorry. Please feel free to leave guidance in the comments below. But she shared authority over that fief with her kinsman, Jean-François de la Rocque de Roberval. And that's where everything really went wrong for her, because it turns out she was related to a massive dick. Yeah. Jean was good friends with the King of France, and based on that friendship, the King of France granted him the authority to start a colony in Canada, and he took Marguerite with him. Now, I should note that we're not entirely sure what the family relationship was. In some version, they're cousins. In others, they're an uncle and niece. And there's one source, a very unlikely one, that claims they're brother and sister. And Well, back then it was a long ride from France to Canada by ship, not that you had other alternatives, and there wasn't very much to do. So Marguerite met a nice young man and started getting a little intimate, and then she got a little pregnant. Jean was a strict Calvinist, and conveniently enough, if his kinswoman didn't come back, he would inherit all of her lands and all of her money. And according to some sources, he was in debt up to his eyeballs. We all see where this is going, right? So, in 1541, he dumps her maidservant who had been covering for her, a lady named Dominique, and the guy who's never named in any of the sources, on a remote island off the eastern coast of Canada. This is a practice called marooning, and I should note this was never widely practiced or considered normal, at least not in any source I could find. In fact, the only group of people known to widely practice it were pirates. And I'm just going to note, if you're adopting your disciplinary practices from a group of people known to break the law fairly often, you're probably off the reservation there, just a touch. But, to be fair, I should note that Jean would later take up a career in piracy, even though he wasn't any good in it, but that's for later. Let's get back to the Isle. Now, they would build a shelter and try to find food for themselves, and Marguerite gave birth on that island. An ordeal she survived despite a very poor diet and a profound lack of medical care. Sadly, her maid died, the young man died, and just to make this as terrible as possible, the child died. But Marguerite refused to give up. She learned to scrounge a living alone on that island, at times fighting off predators, and over the winter she found herself hunted by a polar bear. That's one of the largest carnivores on the planet, and she was alone, underfed, probably sick and suffering the effects of Canadian winter, and she had a musket. She was able to repeatedly fend it off from her shelter, and at least to some of the sources I read, she killed it with her musket, which is a heck of a feat right there. There are people who have failed to kill polar bears with modern rifles. She was rescued in 1544, so she was on this island for several years, and she was rescued by boss fishermen who were attracted to the island by fires she kept lit, hoping to attract someone to get her. She returned to France, but instead of reclaiming her title, she became a school teacher and kind of tried to disappear into obscurity. Maybe she just wanted to stay the hell away from Jean, but really, after all of that, who could blame her? She would not achieve obscurity, though. Her story got out, and she became something of a celebrity. It would end up published in the Histories Tragiques by François de Belleforest and the Cosmographie by André Favet. I couldn't find out if André's trip to the Isle was supposed to happen before or after Marguerite, and that's because it's only mentioned in one of my sources, the book Phantom Atlas by Edward Brooke Hitchings, who does not give any details there. The book is still a great source for lost lands, map mistakes, and all sorts of historical oddities, though, but back on topic. Now, as for Jean, his colony failed after 2 years, and in 1543, he fled back to France. So he couldn't last as long as Marguerite on her own, and he left a year earlier than she got rescued. On the way back to France, he turned to piracy, swooping down to the Caribbean to hit rival colonies and see if he could get enough money back to pay his debts. So much for any real religious scruples, I guess. I mean, he tries to underhandedly kill one of his relatives for sleeping with a guy, but without a second thought, it seems, he breaks the 6th, 7th, and 10th commandment, not to mention ignoring the Messiah's own instructions, stuff like the Golden Rule, the Sermon on the Mount, all that good stuff. Hey, ignore all that, he's got to make some money. Bloody Pharisee of a Frenchman. Well, sorry. Anyways, he was a lousy pirate because he ended up in more debt after his tyrannical career than when he started. And by 1555, his lands were being threatened with seizure to pay his debts. Maybe that's why Marguerite didn't bother coming back. She just wanted to sit back and watch everything fall down around him. Well, all that came to an end in 1560 because that's when he was assassinated. Now, fair to say, Marguerite's story survives, and even in the 20th and 21st century, people are still writing books about it. Elizabeth M. Boyer wrote 2 books about Marguerite. The first one is called A Colony of One, The History of a Brave Woman, and the second one is Marguerite de la Rocque, A Story of Survival. Charles Goulet wrote Isle of Demons in 2000, and in 2008, Anna Maria Beckel wrote Silence of Stone. And as recently as 2025, the novel Isolde was based on this story. There have been plays, songs, and in at least one of my sources, there's a television series listed based on this story. So, in a sense, she has achieved more than Jean ever could. But what happened to Marguerite after she returned to France? We don't know. Her later life and her death is unrecorded. All I can say is that I hope she found some peace and that her later life was a happy one. Now, I'm sure some of you are wondering, what about the island itself? Well, there are competing claims to which modern island was the Isle of Demons. Horpon Island in Newfoundland has a whole tourist industry based around this claim, but other islands like Belle Isle and Harrington Island also claim to be the real Isle of Demons. It's going to be next to impossible to determine the truth of this because the only thing that would really settle it would be to find archaeological evidence of Marguerite's marooning on that island, which is unlikely at best. It's on that note that I'm going to end this week's video. I hope you found it informative or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing, as all of that helps me in my eternal battle with the Dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you like a voice on future videos, consider joining my Everwise patrons for $8 a month. Speaking of patrons, special thanks to my biggest supporter, Big Steve. May you never be marooned, Steve. Next week, by vote of those same patrons, we're going to be covering Mount Henglai of Chinese myth. I hope you'll join me, but until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading!